Hi everyone, welcome back to my Elden Ring series where I make a build for every melee weapon in the game. In today's video, I'll be covering the Great Knife. This weapon is a dagger that requires 6 strength and 12 dexterity to wield and inflicts the bleed status effect. It can be farmed from the small demi-human enemies that wield it, and the best place to do so is near the Craftsman Shack in Mount Gelmir. For this build, I went with a dexterity based setup using the Keen Infused Great Knife with the Stormblade Ash of War. I also have a finger seal in my offhand in order to buff our weapon with the Blood Flame Blade incantation, which provides additional bleed buildup. The Stormblade Ash of War gives us a decently fast ranged attack that can be chained to deal good damage while remaining at a distance. The damage of this skill scales with dexterity, so we will be getting optimal damage with this setup. Additionally, using it at close range allows you to get extra damage from the weapon hitbox itself, and these attacks will also apply the bleed effect from Blood Flame Blade while the buff is active. Unfortunately, however, in my testing, the ranged wind attack does not apply bleed even with the Blood Flame Blade. I'm actually using one other incantation as well in this build, and that is Flame Grant Me Strength, which increases both physical and fire damage while active. For the armor choice, I wanted to make our character as bloody as possible in honor of the first bleed build in the series, so I settled on using the Blood-Soaked Mask, Blood-Soaked Tabard, Mausoleum Greaves, and Vagabond Gauntlets. It looks pretty gnarly and I quite like it. I definitely would not want to see a guy dressed like this running at me with a glowing red knife. Moving on to our talismans, I first off chose the Enraged Divine Beast, which increases the damage of storm-based attacks, and that of course includes the Stormblade skill. I also have the Shard of Alexander to get even more damage out of this skill. Next I chose the Lord of Blood's Exaltation for a damage boost when we trigger an enemy to bleed. And finally I chose the Bullgoat Talisman to give us more poise, which puts us over the 51 poise threshold with this armor so that we can tank through certain attacks, which is definitely helpful since Stormblade doesn't really get a lot of hyper armor. Of course, with a better armor setup, we could swap this out for something like the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, a defensive talisman, the Carrion Filigree Crest, the Old Lord's Talisman, or one of the Turtle Talismans. But we won't be doing that because the drip takes priority as always. My Flask of Wondrous Physic is nothing special here. I'm just using the Opaline Hard tier for more defense and the Green Burst Crystal tier for more stamina recovery. Now onto the stats for the build. At level 150, I have 50 Vigor, 35 Mind, 19 Endurance, 10 Strength, 80 Dexterity, 10 Intelligence, 15 Faith, and 10 Arcane. Now let's talk about how the build plays. During boss fights, I typically start off by buffing myself with Flame Grant Me Strength, as well as Blood Flame Blade if the boss is able to bleed. In the open world, I try to keep Blood Flame Blade active when fighting through enemies, but sometimes, to be honest, I'll just go without it since it doesn't really add any significant damage, especially if the enemies aren't weak to bleed or they have so little health that they die first anyway. Basically, all of our raw damage comes from the weapon itself. In any case, during fights I tend to lean heavily on the Stormblade Ash of War, chaining back-to-back uses when possible, and ideally hitting the enemy with the dagger itself during this attack as well to get some bleed buildup. We have quite a lot of FP at our disposal, and Stormblade doesn't use much FP, enabling us to use this attack often and rebuff when needed. Stormblade also doesn't consume too much stamina, so 19 Endurance I found to be more than enough most of the time. The regular R1 attacks are also quite viable with this setup, and can be spammed quickly for solid damage and bleed. We get the most damage out of this build by pumping Dexterity to maximize the scaling with the Keen Infusion. We do get a very small boost from the Faith portion of the Blood Flame Blade incantation, but this is basically negligible, and for this reason I didn't feel the need to go higher than 15 Faith, which is just enough to use Flame Grant Me Strength. You could go up to 25 to use Golden Vow as well, but I personally don't think this build needs it. And that brings us to the end of this Great Knife build video. Here is an overview of our setup from the menu screen. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.